I'm Gemma Desai. I'm going to be hosting this evening. I'm a writer and a programmer. And next to me is Anthony Andrews of We Are Parable Fame.
Indeed, yep.
Do you want to explain what We Are Parable?
Yeah, sure. Yep, use mic. Yes, I'm Anthony Andrews from We Are Parable. We Are Parable is an events company that specialises in film exhibitions. So we screen films and then we create experiences around them to contextualise films for our audience as well as to immerse them in the environment of a film.
And the amazing presence behind us.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing. I'm not sure why, but...
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
okay.
That's great.
Okay, perfect. Hi Peter, I'm Gemma. I'm a programmer and a writer, and I'm going to be hosting this evening. It's a real honour to have you here up on the big screen, where this amazing film just played here. 25 years since it was made. We've got an audience here who I'm sure has some questions, but I'm going to start with a few just now.
Sure. Thank you for having me, by the way, in the Dock House, and it's really great of all of you.
No, well, thank you for being here. I just wanted to get a sense from the audience of people that are watching this film for the first time tonight. And anyone that watched it, so most of the audience, just so that you have a sense, Peter, most of the audience are seeing it for the first time. And anyone that saw it back in 1994? No one going back that time. So, Peter, you are the institutional memory of this film, right here and right now. And I guess I wanted to start with that, is that this film has obviously had like many anniversaries. It's the 10th anniversary, the 15th, the 20th. We're on the 25th, and every time there's a real sense of how resonant the film is, how much it has to say about the present moment. But I wondered if you could just take us really back to the beginning. Like, what was the specific context that this film was coming into in terms of sports and the NBA, but also in terms of documentary and in terms of the social issues that you're exploring?
Sure. So let me, if you don't mind me, just sort of giving you a little bit of my background right before I got to Hoop Dreams, because it's kind of interesting, I think, when you look at that film, which is, I was very lucky to have some incredible mentors as filmmakers. And so one of them was Barbara Koppel, who did the film Harlan County, and then I photographed a film for her called American Dream. Both of those films won Academy Awards. And what was great about Barbara was she did longitudinal filmmaking. So I worked for 7.5 years on the film American Dream. And then also Michael Apted from the Up series in England was also a mentor of mine. And so I worked with him a lot on a bunch of other films. So I had come off of working with those folks, and in Chicago, Cartunquin Films, which is the organization that housed Hoop Dreams, and we would have never been able to make it without them, and it is our documentary home, Steve and I's, for sure. And it has been, it's the oldest documentary house in the United States. So it's in its like 54th year. So, which is a long time. So the founders go back, to Pennebaker, to all of the sort of great 60s collective documentarians. So when I came there, Gordon Quinn, who started Cartunquin, Steve James, the director of the film, had sort of told him about this basketball film that he was thinking of making. And he knew that I was absolutely basketball crazed. Both Steve and I played in high school. I tried to play in college, he did. But for us, it was socially this really amazing thing, because it was where we met people who were different than us. America back then was segregated as it is in many ways now. But playing on a basketball court was a place where you just met people from every background. It didn't matter. It was just everyone was into playing the game. And so Steve's original idea was to actually just focus on one court So one basketball court. So in the inner city in Chicago, and just see what it was like to hang out there and film for a summer. What happened is that very early in doing that, we met Earl Smith, who you saw in the film, who then introduced us to Arthur Agee's family. And then when we went out to St. Joe's with Arthur and his parents, and he was being recruited by St. Joe's, there was a moment where Pingatore basically says, if you do what I say, kind of follow what I want you to do, I promise you that you will go to a Division I, university. For me, in my background, coming off of Barbara Koppel and those kinds of filmmakers, that's like, we have to follow this. Forget the basketball court in the city. This is the story. Because here's this white guy telling this inner city family that if you do what I tell you to do, your kid's gonna go to, an elite college. So for me, that was like the hook of the film for us. And so a film that I think we thought we were gonna make in about 30 days, over a period of 30 days, was more like a film we made over a period of 8 years. And it was an incredible ride. And socially, the NBA then in Chicago it was just the beginning of the Michael Jordan era. So shoe companies were just coming into play, companies like Nike and Adidas, New Balance. It was a really interesting time in the society. And not only that, but basketball, like it has in America, has a very strong political voice, even today. And so it was like also the confluence of, rap music, all different things were all coming into play as we were filming this. But we've never looked at the film as a basketball film. We only looked at it really as this story about, friends, parents, relationships with fathers and sons, that kind of thing. It really was about that for us. Sorry about the long-winded answer, but it's tough 25 years later that the film still carries quite a bit of emotional tug for me.
No, it wasn't long-winded at all. It was perfect. And I think that the emotion that's put into the film is really interesting because obviously it was a very crucial time for all of you filmmakers as well. You were kind of coming of age with that film too, right?
Yeah, it was really interesting. We were all coming from different places. So I guess it's funny now because Steve is, Steve's pretty iconic in the documentary world these days. More than pretty iconic, he is iconic. He's a master. He's a fantastic filmmaker. For me, I had been more in the field longer. And so it was a different thing. But what was fascinating for us, I think, is that we just bonded so heavily over the subject matter, and it was sort of in our backyard. And what I mean by that is that I only lived literally 8 blocks from where William Gates lived. But that 8 blocks could be a million miles in terms of how people live, in terms of the difference between class and race. I would walk over to Williams to hang out. I didn't have to drive. And it was that kind of proximity, everything that also made the film really relevant.
I want to bring you in at this point, Anthony, and talk about, Peter's just talked about this extreme proximity to the filmmaking. You saw the film a bit later after its release,
That's right,
and you were also watching it very far away from where it was shot.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the experiences of watching it for the first time?
Yeah, I think watching it for the first time, I was probably about 15, 16, and I was madly in love with basketball. So you can probably tell by my height, 6'7", 6'8", and I played basketball every day with my friends. I was playing for a local London team. So when we heard about this film, Hoop Dreams, we thought, right, we have to watch it, we have to find out like how these guys are going to get to the NBA. And it was just such a, I remember staying up late watching it on BBC Two and just feeling like, these guys are putting everything into playing basketball. And I remember sometimes my mum wouldn't let me play basketball. She was like, you have to focus on your studies. But then watching that with my mum, she was like, whenever you want to play basketball, you let me know. Because, just seeing the passion that these guys had was incredible to see. And actually, I just wanted to pick up on something that you said about the proximity of how close you live to William, because I think Steve McQueen in Widows showed that scene really well, where I think Colin Farrell's character is like talking to a number of working class people, and then he goes into a car and he drives for about 5 minutes into this really affluent area. So I can definitely see the parallels of that. But I think watching it again now, seeing the sort of social economic issues and like the father and son dynamic as well, that was so strong for me now and really emotional to see on screen. So yeah.
The immediacy.
Can I just say one comment on that? Is that what's fascinating is that, when Coach Pingatore introduced us to William, and William, there was really, I know this is going to sound strange, but we were curious about their ride through, about the idea of going to the NBA. It was really much more about them just getting out of high school. Right. For us. And it's funny because the NBA is so prevalent there, that dream, and I think we were also curious about why that dream, because that dream seemed, even then, now I still do a lot of films that are about sports and society. And it's like, that dream's like a 1 in 600,000 person dream. It's a small dream. Why not dream to be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is that you want to do? But that was what, at that time, kids were seeing on TV. It was like their way out. They could see it. Like, you could go up to a kid and say to him, how do you become a lawyer? And they would go, I don't know. How do you go to the NBA? Well, first, I go out and I play on here, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and then I'm going to the NBA. It was like they had a job description for them written out. So it's really wild, and that's still prevalent. In sports, it's incredible. In some ways, I think the film, having now filmed things in sports for 25 years, I think the film's just as relevant in many ways as it was. If anything, it's gotten more intense and more crazy as time has gone on.
I think it's quite interesting you say about, why this dream, and I think, the reason that, certainly what I think is that the reason why a lot of these young people think that this dream is viable, because it's within their control, or so they see it as. I think when you talk about being a doctor or a lawyer, there's a systematic, almost bias against you. And I think being able to control how you play, how you maneuver yourself on the basketball court. If you're good, the idea is that if you're good enough, you can make it. And obviously, you see throughout the film that there are certain systematic things in place, which means that they don't quite get to where they want to be. But I think the dream starts by just saying, okay, like you said, I'm going to go to a court, I'm going to practice 10 hours a day, and I'm going to get better to a point where I can be ready to play in the NBA. And I love Arthur. I was almost going to say character, because it feels like a feature. We were just saying off mic, this film feels like a feature. But,
Arthur's the man.
Yeah.
Arthur's the man to me. What he went through, and I don't think people can ever really get it in some ways. So here's this kid who's from a really, really, both William and him, really tough neighborhood. That neighborhood is still tough. It is, I hate to use these terms, but in some ways it's sort of like the killing field of Chicago, the West and South Side. We average in Chicago 800 to 900 people murdered in those areas every year. It's really sad, and it was just as bad then. And Arthur, so think about being in this place where you saw like drug dealers on his block, all that kind of stuff, a really violent, rough neighborhood. He goes out to this place, this white suburban high school. Everyone sort of gives him a pass. in his neighborhood because he's getting out. He's actually going out and doing something, really amazing, bettering himself. Then a year and a half later, he's back in the neighborhood, and he had to totally reprove himself. And just the danger he was in with all the folks who were around him, who sort of had let him sort of hang, by himself. And now all of a sudden, he's got to reprove himself. He's got to deal on a much different level with his dad and the issues that were going on with his mom. And he really, the fact that Arthur pulled himself up and got to the place that he did is really amazing, because he didn't have the same kind of help that William had, because William had people really a slightly different family dynamic, and also he was a great player. So having greatness helps. People are going to protect you more. Arthur had to go back and reprove that he was great.
I also think that one thing that was that I think blinking you miss it was the part when they're buying all the latest apparel from the shop, and they mentioned that the local drug dealers are so proud of these players that they're actually putting money into investing in them to keep going and keep trying to protect their dream. It's almost like they were sort of protectors of their dream more than the system was, and I found that fascinating. These people that are demonized, that are given really bad reputations in the media, are actually supporting their community and actually providing that community to those basketball players who are out there trying to achieve their dreams. I thought that was something that was I found really magnetic in the film.
So it's interesting. One of my business partners, it was the #1 ranked basketball player of that year that William and Arthur. Chris Webber, who played in the and what's fascinating in what you saw with William, and I think William was a man-child emotionally. I mean, I wish that I could be as intelligent, bright, self-aware as William has always been. He's an amazing person. And there's that moment in the film, and I'll misquote it probably, but where he talks about basically, people always come up to me and say, "I hope you remember me when you get to the NBA," and I say, "I hope you remember me if I don't," or something in that line. It's fascinating because my business partner, Chris, he saw he's in the film actually. He's at the Nike All-American camp. And, later he made it. He was the first round draft pick in the NBA, all that. He made all that stuff. But the interesting thing was his brother is like the vice president of Honeywell, huge corporation in Chicago. I mean, and he came from poverty. And he has this whole family. And what's fascinating is no one would ever ask any of the people in his family who made it out for a dime. But Chris or William, if he had made it, or Arthur, for some reason the community has this ownership feeling of them. And so even to this day, if I go back to where Chris was born, his street or whatever, people still come up to him, and it's like they feel ownership in him. It's so different. The pressure is so intense, I can't describe it for people in that situation. And then the one thing I will say too about Arthur, that Arthur's saving grace, and a lot of it we couldn't film because he just wouldn't let us in many ways, was too many people I think fixate on Coach Pingatore in the film because he's a great character, but Coach Bedford, Arthur's coach, this guy, he's very deadpan, he's very, all that kind of stuff. This guy was the real deal. He didn't recruit, he didn't need to recruit, he didn't care about that stuff. His thing was, I just want these kids to grow up and survive. Yeah. And he brought groceries to kids' families all the time. He was a true father figure. And, he wouldn't, when he passed away, his funeral was one of the most amazing things, I'd ever seen. There were like 5,000 people there that he had affected from just being there for them. And it wasn't just basketball players, it was just being somebody who's in their community that cares. And he was an amazing man. So anyways, I got off the point there, but.
No, it's okay. I wanted to actually quote Arthur because in the sort of 20th anniversary screening that you did at Indie Memphis, he says, "These three white guys were the bravest white guys I've ever met." And it kind of goes to kind of what you're saying about the relationship that you built and how your proximity allowed you to walk over, but actually your worlds were actually quite far apart. And some of the stuff that you've just been talking about as well, raises the sort of question of ethics and gaze that you were kind of trying to negotiate the entire time of the project. So how did you discuss the project that you were making and what your personal involvement would be in it, given you were building such a personal relationship with your subjects?
Gotcha. So Steve and I were primarily in the field all the time. And one of the things that we, in the field, within a couple miles of where we lived all the time. And one of the things that we were very strong about was we would go and film this stuff, and we would always come back and really dissect it in the sense of we were still outsiders looking in, and we never forgot that. And that's why Steve's voice narrates the film. It narrates the film because, at least if you're from America, you know that that's a white person talking and is the one, so that you never have this thing that we're trying to say that we captured the entire experience of these kids, these families, or the African American experience in America. We're just saying, here we are, three, outsiders, which is sad to say, but we wanted to make that clear. When the film was had the opportunity to be sold, certain distributors offered us more money if we would have at the time, Wesley Snipes or, a bigger African American sort of movie star to narrate it. And we turned them down because we really wanted to make sure that people knew that we were outsiders, and we missed lots of stuff. I mean, they love to this day to tell us how much stuff we missed, or stuff that they kept from us, I mean, and then on the thing of being subjects, I guess in a way, where we got criticized maybe for the film was that it was a little different in the sense that, in my way of looking, I don't know what the right word is anymore, but they participated in the film. And by that, I don't mean that they were being heavily directed in the film or things like that. But if you film people that long, they get really knowledgeable about filmmaking. I mean, they were telling us what to do at some point, which was really amazing. But also, we were very aware of the fact that they were kids. And we also had to be very aware that we couldn't get wrapped up in that dream. It's real easy. I know this is a father of an athlete. It's very easy to get wrapped up in that dream where they're like you feel like they're your nephews and you love them and you get wrapped up in it too. We had to stay very distant from that. And make sure that, that dream was something that we didn't try to force them to, or try to make them do something to, make a wrong decision towards the NBA or whatever it was that they wanted to do. And I think the hardest part was sometimes with parents. I mean, it took Emma. Emma Gates Williams' mom didn't do an interview with us for over a year because she had seen her neighborhood represented very badly on television, like on TV news. and she just didn't really trust us for a year and a half. I think the idea that we kept coming back, and that we were there, and she saw sort of the influence we had with them. Curtis, on the other hand, I think, he really wanted William to achieve because it was something that he didn't achieve, even though he could have. Curtis I watched Curtis play high school basketball. He was amazing. He could have played at any university. He just was one of those guys who was uncoachable. So you see all that pressure that is already there from William and everything. And then, Arthur was in a very rough, home life. And we showed as much as we feel as though it's, fair to show. One of the things we also do with our films is that, they saw the whole film before we released it. We showed it to them. There were certain things we took out, certain things we didn't put in because they were, 18-year-old kids. It was, we're not like totally fly on the wall documentarians in that sense. We're not gonna, we are invested in the family. But what you are seeing there is the truth. You're seeing at least the truth from our point of view.
I want to ask you so much more, but I want to give a chance to the audience to ask their questions. If you raise your hand, and if you don't do it soon, then I'm going to carry on.
I do have to say one thing that's really funny real quick. The biggest thing for the difference in terms of filmmaking is that you have to remember this was the days where cell phones were like that big. If you could afford one. No one, some people had beepers, everybody had landlines, so if you wanted to find somebody, you had to go find them. It wasn't like you could just, text somebody, hey, where are you gonna be? So we were constantly like on the lookout. We would just sometimes just take a camera and go, okay, we'll just go towards Arthur's house and hopefully we'll run into him, So it's just such a different world these days with technology.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay. I was really interested in, you have all these hideous characters, those men, those white men saying things like, we're serving professional meat. And then you have that moment when Spike Lee is in the room saying they're using you, like, they don't need you, like they don't care about you. I was wondering if you talk about that moment and how that worked and how, like, whether he was able to go around and talk to lots of different schools or situations like that, like, and how did that whole thing go down?
So a couple of things. So the scene you're talking about was in the very early days of the shoe companies coming into, really taking over sort of sports in America. That was called the Nike All-American Camp, and that was like the premier camp to go to, and they did it as a quasi-educational thing. So it was on a college campus. So it was at Princeton, a very elite university. And remember, Nike All-American Camp. So probably the person who was more responsible for making Nike a hip shoe to wear was Spike Lee. People forget his first character from She's Gotta Have It is Mars Blackman, and that's who he played in these commercials with Michael Jordan and all this stuff. And Spike was a big part of the shoe industry. And he's also someone that I admire beyond belief. I went to school with him. He's an amazing person, and I think he was a great person to talk to those kids because the fight that he had to go through, if you could just comprehend what it was like for an African-American filmmaker in America at that time to get money to make films, was just, frightening how horrible it was. So I think he was a good person, to be able to talk to those kids in that way. On the other hand, what I will say is that the only time I really got to the point with a character in the film, when you talk about people taking heed and advantage, that I really wanted to, grab someone and just, I don't know, really scream, yell, and get upset, which you can't really do, was there's a scene with Coach Pingatore and William, when William's leaving St. Joe's for the last time. And Coach Pingatore says to him, and again, I'm misquoting, but, you had a good, I think it's like you had a good career, not a great career. We didn't win the state championship, that kind of thing. I wanted to throttle him. Because here's this kid who had a child when he was, 15 years old, who was a great father. He's still married to Catherine. They have 4 kids. They're an amazing family. He had a very low reading rate when he went to that high school. He went through 2 knee surgeries. 2, not 1, 2. And still gets a college scholarship and is going off, and he's doing all of this. And this guy has the audacity to say to him, I think you had an okay career. It's like, give me a break, man. Just because you didn't win, he had not only an okay career, he had a great career. And so that kind of, that's where you get, when you hear that, it's just they're basically to him. And I think, in my mind, William may not think this way, but in my mind, it was like he was being used as a pawn, because this coach wanted to achieve stuff. So I hope that answered the question, but. And Spike did go out and help us a lot with the film. He helped get the film seen quite a bit, and so we thank him.
Hi, thank you. It's a very beautiful film. On the Spike Lee note, I actually had a question. Spike Lee has a film about basketball. It's a sort of like a similar topic. It's called He Got Game.
It's a great film.
I think you're aware of it. That scene where the father and the son were playing, there's like a very similar scene in Spike Lee's film. Was it inspired by this film?
So let me give you a little bit of backstory because it's kind of a great story. So Spike saw Hoop Dreams, and at the time, sort of the really big film festival in America, I'll never be allowed into Sundance again if I say this, but it's true, was the New York Film Festival. That was the film festival you wanted to be in. I'm just saying, that was, because that wasn't just like emerging filmmakers, that was like, you'd be at a film festival with Bertolucci or whatever it was. It was just the film festival. So we were the first documentary to be the closing night film of that film festival. And it was at Avery Fisher Hall, which is this amazing place in New York City. And Spike Lee held a dinner for us and all of the families. And the kids too, were able to go, which was a big fight because the NCAA didn't want the kids who were still in college to be able to go. So anyways, wait, I lost track for a second. Spike, I went to a senior moment. But so Spike, one of the ways that we could get money for the, is we all split up the money equally, but one way that we could get the families more money was to sell their life rights for a feature film. So Spike, we asked them, if you had one filmmaker, who would you pick? And they immediately said Spike Lee. So Spike bought the rights to the film. And it was great because I don't think he ever really thought he was going to ever make a remake of it. It was just that he could do it and get money to the families. And so when he did He Got Game, he basically said to us, I love all those scenes where, like the father and son relationship is based on the basketball court. And we were like, yeah, you know, they're great. You should use them. And I think he definitely saw that from the film. But he was, again, champion those kids, yeah. But he definitely has, that. It's definitely from there, you know, so.
Yeah, we've got to wrap up, but if there's any last burning question, I'd love to give that to you, yeah.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to ask if, because with both Arthur and William, their form seemed to fluctuate with what was going on in their home lives, and I just wanted to know if within basketball, within the college scene, or within schools and whether that's changed now, whether they try to help the kids, because obviously some of these kids, as you've mentioned, are coming from very tough backgrounds and things are going on in their lives which obviously will affect what's going on the court, but they didn't seem to get much help in terms of being able to deal with that or being able to put that to one side, you know. So I was just wondering if that has changed at all, and you know, through people seeing your film, that's kind of changed people's the way that they bring kids through.
So I did another piece where I followed kids in AAU basketball, which is in the United States is the shoe company-based basketball. So kids now don't play outside much. They play indoors, and they play on teams that are funded primarily by shoe companies or with help from their parents, a little bit from the community. It hasn't gotten better. In some ways, it's gotten worse because now, at least when there were high school coaches that meant something, they had a chance to have a relationship with one person. Now these kids are being recruited literally from the time they're 5 years old going up. And with that recruiting, you have to think about, I mean, even this kid, the new big star kid, you know, in the States now is a kid named Zion Williamson. You know, Zion started playing when he was 5 years old, and he's a lucky one, he made it. But they're under intense pressure and they are not getting the help that they should. And the dream, if anything, has grown larger, not smaller. And it is, so just to put one thing in perspective, think about Hoop Dreams when the film came out. No one wanted to buy the film because it was a sports film about Black inner city youth. Think about what you're watching on TV now, which is there's so many sports channels, so much, you know, content is being made about sports that it's its own whole industry. Well, you can't have that industry without those kids' hopes and dreams. And so they're still getting battered.
Which is why I think this film, 25 years on, is still feeling so current and fresh. And I'm just so happy that you were here to tell us about the beginning journey. Thank you so much.
It was a real honor. Thank you very much. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much.
One last thing. My last thing is just that the sad part of the film, why sometimes it's a very bittersweet thing for Steve and I especially, is that, you know, Arthur's father, Bo, was murdered. William's brother, Curtis, was murdered. And that weighs heavy on us. And in some way, you know, and Arthur's dad turned his life around after the film. I mean, he really turned his life around. And right when the world was clicking for him, he was, you know, killed, and most likely from something that had happened way back in the past. And then William's brother Curtis was killed in a very random kind of horrible act. And so it just goes to show that you can even be, you know, that film ran for a year in the United States. It was a big deal. And you can still be up there, but the everyday stuff that those folks were going through, it just doesn't end. And so I dedicate sort of what you're doing with the film now to those folks. So thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us that.
Thank you very much.
you all for your questions.
Thank you.